America is now embroiled in a series of trade wars, hitting all kinds of countries with tariffs. We look at two of them. China, where Beijing's main message is
中方必将奉陪到底.
And Canada, where the Trump administration has Canadians rallying around their flag. And Sudan's civil war may be the most neglected news story on the planet. Partly because reporting on it is such a dangerous business. A trade war that pits the world's two largest economies, the U.S. and China, against each other is now underway. The Trump administration's punishing tariffs, some as high as 145% on Chinese imports, have sent shockwaves through key industries, inflating costs and deepening economic uncertainty in America. Beijing has hit back hard, making clear to both domestic and global audiences that Washington is the instigator in this and denouncing its tariffs as a reckless endangerment to both sides. China's state media outlets echo that same argument. Their mission, despite the looming costs of this conflict to Chinese citizens, is to strengthen national unity. All too often, the media narrative in the U.S. offers a different kind of take, that China's economic successes somehow represent an inherent threat to American interests, its global hegemony, and that the time has come to rally behind the flag. This is a fluid and, given the Trump administration's way of doing business, at times chaotic story that starts with an AI angle, a shot across America's bow, meme warfare coming out of China. Trade wars are not new to the world. Some of the weapons now in use are. Like these memes produced in China, informational counterattacks in the trade war the Trump administration has launched against Beijing, in which tariffs are Washington's weapon of choice. AI-generated videos aimed at American social media users depicting would-be laborers in the U.S. putting in the hours, doing the kind of work currently being done in Chinese factories.
And they are all obese, depressed looking, the very sort of stereotypical image of the ugly American that's popular in other countries. They're fat, lazy, not very good. To rile up the Chinese base for the cause, there's an effort to demoralize Americans, weaken their resolve for these measures, because nobody wants to work in a textile factory for 20 hours a day.
The Chinese propaganda machine, the primary message in the current moment is U.S. is a troublemaker. The destabilizing force, U.S. is disrupting the global trading system to shape up the narrative of China being the more desirable alternative to the U.S. leadership, which is why you also hear this argument that eventually China is going to be the winner.
中方必将奉陪到底.
Because what U.S. is burning is its own national capacity, is its own national credibility, as well as its global leadership.
I'm not sure if the Chinese state, the Chinese Communist Party, is the one that's generating those memes, but they've certainly been shared very widely across Chinese state media and across Chinese diplomatic corps. And the fact that some of them have gone viral, shows that there is a place for meme warfare in the battle for public discourse.
This on-again, off-again Trumpian trade war is multilateral, affecting dozens of countries. Yet the way China has been targeted, with tariffs of 145% placed on all its exports to the U.S., puts it in a category of its own. The industries and companies affected, names like Apple, Boeing, Nike, and Levi, that rely on manufacturing in China are already feeling the pinch, despite the pauses placed on some tariffs. The Trump administration is wreaking an unprecedented amount of confusion and chaos onto global trade, which requires order to function. While the White House says the ultimate goal is to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., a different narrative, one centered on national security and global hegemony, underlines some of the news coverage being presented to Americans.
When America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there
this narrative that
The Chinese system is fragile, and with the right push or the right pressure applied, that it will collapse. It's wishful thinking.
What that does to China, it collapses their economy, mass unemployment, and then possibly the regime gets toppled.
You want to increase uncertainty and doubt about your competitor, to undermine confidence others have in this country. So we are witnessing a battle of narratives here.
That's how media responds to development in international affairs. There's always a need to have an enemy, right? We saw this during the Cold War, we saw this after 9/11. So in order to rally public support and to build internal consensus within American society, sometimes you do need a boogeyman, a big enough, serious enough, a bad enough boogeyman for American people to unite together.
Because the Chinese were going to bomb us if the Russians didn't bomb us. This is the same sound.
There's always a need for a bigger enemy in order for the U.S. to forge its consensus.
In the Trump era, the hostility of many media outlets is tempering the China threat because the mainstream media doesn't really want to hand it to Trump. And we're already seeing a softening of the anti-China narrative in the mainstream press. And the Chinese media is oriented towards maintaining stability.
中国在这一轮的产业变革当中，展现出了强大的发展韧性。
That fits in with telling people we're going to stay the course, and the adults are in charge.
And China's messaging, for the most part, has been much more low-key. The exceptions include this editorial in the state-owned English-language paper China Daily, saying the U.S. needs to stop whining and playing the victim after years spent taking a free ride on the globalization train. And this op-ed, written by China's ambassador in Moscow and published in a Russian paper, accusing the U.S. of using tariffs as a blunt instrument to sow the seeds of global chaos. The optics have included President Xi Jinping's recent trip to Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam, implicitly emphasizing that China has other trading partners it can do business with. It is dual-purpose messaging, designed to get international attention and to reassure China's domestic audience of 1.4 billion people.
The question of how much Chinese people believe Chinese Communist Party propaganda is an incredibly difficult one to answer. And there's no good public opinion polling in China. It's way too sensitive. And so we just don't know, and we have to repeat anecdotal evidence or see what kind of posts seem to get more attention on social media in China, with the very important caveat that social media in China is so heavily censored. And so a post doing very well doesn't mean it reflects what Chinese people think about that post.
At the same time, we have to look at the practical economic realities. So China, 1.4 billion people, enormous domestic market. We look at the advances in the so-called industries of the future. Electric vehicles, for example. China now is the undisputed leader, not just in volume, but in technology and design of electric vehicles. So when you put that together, it really becomes a compelling narrative that many around the world challenge and undermine. But this is a narrative that withstands even the most rigorous kind of scrutiny.
My sense is the Chinese people are pretty solidly rallied around what their government has expressed, because we did not start this, right? But the caveat is I don't think the Chinese people understand the tremendous economic impact that this will have over their lives. Just like I don't think the MAGA crowd here in the United States realize how the tariff war is going to affect the bills that they will have to pay.
Xi Jinping's recent emphasis on China's other trading partners mirrors what many Western leaders have been doing, looking for alternatives to doing business with the U.S. And China is better positioned than most to do that. 15 years ago, it became a founding member of BRICS, pairing up with other emerging economies like Brazil's. Then, it launched its Belt and Road Initiative to strengthen economic ties across Asia. And it's invested heavily in Africa, including in news outlets in multiple countries, forging trading relationships there and in Latin America. In this fast-moving economic story, we may be about to find out whether those investments have paid off.
While Western media is important, I think we must not overlook the increasing importance of the global South. That we're no longer in a unipolar world dominated by the United States, but in a multipolar world. And from a media perspective, we are also increasingly in a multipolar media world as well.
It is certainly possible that China emerges stronger from this trade war, or that the Communist Party emerges stronger from this trade war. It's very difficult to know what that's going to look like, and it's really important to remember the huge upheaval that's happening in the world right now. And by the time between having this conversation and the interview airs, the narrative could already be quite different.
This past week, the civil war in Sudan hit the 2-year mark. The scale of the killings and displacement has been as horrific as it has been underreported. The Sudanese media landscape has been devastated. According to Reporters Without Borders, since the war began, nearly 450 journalists have fled the country. Meenakshi Ravi has been tracking this story.
The statistics from the Sudanese war are shocking, and given how little coverage the war has been getting, they're worth putting on the record. The latest UN figures record 150,000 Sudanese killed and around 13 million displaced. The latest figures pertaining to the media have come from Reporters Without Borders and the Sudan Media Forum. At least 7 media workers have been killed. The most recent targeting took place in mid-March during the Sudanese army's recapture of the presidential palace in Khartoum.
الذين استشهدوا خلال أداء واجبهم أثناء تغطية معركة تحرير القصر.
3 state TV journalists were hit in a drone strike by the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, which is the UAE-backed militia at war with the Sudanese armed forces. 90% of Sudan's media outlets have ceased to function. At least 17 journalists have been imprisoned, others kidnapped and tortured, and hundreds have fled, primarily to neighboring countries. Sudanese media outlets in exile, many of which were established during previous wars and crises, have multiplied. At least 10 websites have been launched in the past 2 years. Despite working outside Sudan, though, many journalists continue to be at risk. The most extensively documented cases are from Egypt, which hosts the largest community of Sudanese journalists in exile. Egyptian security forces, which have conducted large-scale operations to round up, detain, and deport Sudanese refugees, have gone after specific journalists. 4 from the TV station Sudan Bukra were arrested last September after filming an interview with a human rights activist. A month later, they were jailed in a military prison and have been told they will be sent back to Sudan. Journalists have reported death threats being texted to them, both from the RSF and the Sudanese army, and many find themselves having to move between different countries, searching for where they might actually be safe.
Thanks, Mina. Like China, Canada has been caught up in a nasty trade war with the United States. It began just 3 weeks after Donald Trump's inauguration, when the U.S. president announced 25% tariffs, first on steel and aluminium, and then on other imports from north of the border. Trump has also been musing about how Canada should become America's 51st state, which Canadians see as a clear threat to their independence. Between those two issues, a nationalistic wave has swept through the country, a movement against all things American. U.S.-made liquor is being pulled from store shelves, shoppers are encouraged to buy Canadian, and cross-border trips to the U.S. are down by 70%. The tariffs and talk of annexation come at a politically delicate time. Canadians are about to vote in a snap election in just over a week. The Listening Post's Ryan Kohls now on the Trump effect and the unprecedented impact it's having on Canadian nationalism and politics.
This was a provocative moment. In one of the world's largest ice hockey stadiums in Montreal, Canadian fans booed as the U.S. national anthem was sung. It was the Four Nations ice hockey tournament. The U.S. team was facing off against Canada. The booing of the American anthem happened so often at other games that stadium announcers had to request fans to restrain themselves.
We also ask it in the spirit of this great game that unites everyone, that you kindly respect the national anthems and the players that represent each country.
What had riled Canadians up was the heat coming at them from south of the border.
It costs us $200 billion a year in subsidy to keep Canada afloat. Canada should honestly become our 51st state. Oh, Canada, the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states.
Canadians are furious. I haven't seen this kind of anger towards the US probably ever. People go to the grocery stores and they're checking where the products are from to make sure that they're not buying American. Travel is hugely down to the United States, and normally that's a place that Canadians go to all the time. So it's really, really, really intense. I haven't seen anything like it.
Even more than anger, you hear the term betrayal. Because this isn't a case of a historic geopolitical antagonist raising old complaints or anything like that. The idea of the president of our biggest trading partner and our historic ally essentially threatening to destroy our economy right in the midst of an election campaign, it's been huge.
A huge story with a rapid timeline. November 5th, 2024, Donald Trump is elected to his second term. Just a few days into 2025, after 10 years in office, Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, trailing badly in the polls and with his party in revolt, calls it quits.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister. This country deserves a real choice in the next election.
2 weeks later, Trump is inaugurated in Washington.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
On February 1st, he imposes sweeping tariffs, import taxes, on goods from Canada. By early March, Trudeau's Liberal Party has chosen his successor, Mark Carney, the former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. Carney quickly calls a snap election and a campaign unlike anything Canadians have ever seen. One with an existential element to it begins.
There's two parties that are most likely to stand a shot at winning this election, either the Liberals and Mark Carney or the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre. And they are different parties, but on some issues, the two major parties are actually quite close. They both want to respond to Donald Trump forcefully, and they're both trying to capture the nationalist spirit right now for electoral gain.
So the Americans, they should make no mistake, in trade as in hockey, Canada will win.
One is running on Canada Strong, the other is running on Canada First. But the Liberals are probably capitalizing on this a little more than the Conservatives, and Carney on top of that is seen as the more competent, capable person for dealing with Donald Trump. So the Liberals have been able to take the sentiment, take the anger, to use it to their advantage, in large part because of how people perceive Mark Carney.
Mark Carney has a very decorated career in the banking sector, in the private sector. He has spent his life in the real world, and he's a political rookie. Pierre Poilievre has been in Parliament for over 20 years, and he's not that old.
Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
He's a career politician. This is basically all he's ever done. They're two really different candidates. Mark Carney is a more center candidate than his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, was. Pierre Poilievre, though, was really doing the Trump thing.
Merci beaucoup. Who's ready to axe the tax?
It wasn't that long ago that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, riding a double-digit lead in the polls, thought he had the next election in the bag. Poilievre is a sharp-tongued populist, often scathing of the liberal establishment, including the state-owned broadcaster, the CBC.
And I can't wait to defund the CBC.
Incumbency fatigue was working against the Liberals, and Poilievre's Conservatives seemed to have a natural ally in the White House. Until that ally in waiting started talking about tariffs, and Canada becoming the US's 51st state.
In terms of this crisis with the Americans, the conservative message, at first at least, was this just shows how weak Canada has become, that we can be bullied by the Americans like this. This just shows this lack of leadership that the governing Liberals have exhibited. For the Liberals, on the other hand, their message has been very different.
playing off the same crisis, they're saying this, of all times, is when we don't want anybody who ideologically might be closer to Trump. This theme of being somehow un-Canadian, and the timing has been very convenient for the Liberals.
So we can never know for sure how much Mark Carney owes to Donald Trump for his electability, in part because when Justin Trudeau stepped down, a lot of the baggage of the Liberal Party seems to have gone with him. He's almost like a kind of calming father figure. He's like Carney daddy. God help us. This is what a lot of people are seeing in him. It's a time of chaos, and they want someone who's going to bring a little bit of order, predictability, and stability.
Carney has been riding the rising tide of his popularity. His first major media appearance took him outside the country, a sit-down with Jon Stewart in the USA.
You sneaky, you're running as an outsider. I am an outsider.
He skated with an ice hockey team based in Alberta and appeared in campaign ads alongside actor Mike Myers.
Will there always be a Canada? There will always be a Canada. All right, elbows up. Elbows up.
Ideologically, Carney is up against Post Media, a chain of conservative newspapers with American ownership, as well as a collection of right-wing media outlets, Rebel News, Juno News, and Canada Proud, a media ecosystem where Poilievre feels right at home.
Hopefully it won't be 2.5 years before we speak again.
No, we should do it more often.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson, one of Canada's most well-known podcast experts, did a nearly 2-hour-long interview with Poilievre. Poilievre has kept the rest of Canadian media at a distance, restricting to an unprecedented degree the access political reporters have to him. He says that's to allow local journalists to come to the fore. There's been little evidence of that.
Sorry, there's just a protester here. Go ahead.
It's a reporter trying to ask you a legitimate question.
So the Conservatives have chosen the media as an opponent. Pierre Poilievre wants to defund the national broadcaster, the CBC, although just the English side. Incidentally, he doesn't want to do that to the French side. If you look at the fundraising emails you get from the Conservatives, it's often the media doesn't want you to know this, the media is attacking us. You can really rally your base by coming up with an enemy, and that enemy in this case is the media.
The skepticism of the CBC that Poilievre has tapped into, I don't think that's an example of any kind of pro-Trump extremism. I think unless you live in Canada, it's hard to appreciate how low the CBC has fallen in terms of the interest that a lot of Canadians have in it. Even if you don't share the progressive politics that the CBC often echoes, I think it's true that a lot of Canadians do resent that. I think it's the figure something like $1.6 billion gets spent on a media service that they don't think reflects mainstream politics.
Mark Carney has taken the opposite approach. He's promised to boost the CBC's budget by about 10%, or $150 million. That hockey game in Montreal, when Canadians booed the US national anthem, began with high emotion. Within the first 10 seconds, there were 3 fights on the ice. All 3, like the tariff war and the talk of the 51st state, were started by the American team. The Canadian players fought back. It was an on-ice metaphor for what is taking place in this bilateral relationship and the world of Canadian politics.
We have never feuded with the United States to this degree.
Will we ever be the 51st state?
And now I think that's part of why some Canadians feel so hurt by this. It's like almost personal. It's resulted in a total shift in their electoral fortunes. The Liberals are skyrocketing in the polls and the Conservatives are dropping. The entire progressive vote is basically coalescing behind the Liberals at this point because they think Mark Carney is best suited to deal with Trump. That's what the polls at least are telling us. Pierre Poilievre must be so mad at Trump right now.
And finally, a year and a half into Israel's assault on Gaza, the number of Palestinian journalists killed has surpassed 200, making it the deadliest conflict for reporters the world has ever seen. This past week, a collective of French journalists released a statement of solidarity with their colleagues in Gaza. We have seen isolated statements like this one before, but the journalists who signed this latest one represent outlets from across the political spectrum in France. Their letter describes the macabre routine of Israel targeting journalists, some in their homes, and calls out Israel for imposing a media blackout on Gaza to silence the witnesses of the war crimes committed by its troops. The context is what matters here. Mainstream media in France have painted critics of Israel as anti-Semitic. The authorities have tried to ban pro-Palestine demonstrations. And those kinds of tactics are taking place in far too many countries, where legacy media outlets have caved under political pressure, failed to do their jobs, making excuses for, rather than covering, a genocide.